So welcome to Navigating Crucial Confrontations. I apologize for the chair situation. We have perimeter seating that is coming in, so we should have chairs for everyone in just a few minutes. We're going to go ahead and get started so that we don't keep you behind. So just do your best to pretend to ignore the chairs being trucked into the room. That would be awesome. So each of you have gotten half of a little red ticket. I have the other half. At the end of this class, we are going to do a drawing for a cool surprise. And this lovely lady here has the rest of my tickets, so if you haven't gotten one, she'll get you. And it's a surprise that goes with the subject matter of this class that I think you'll find really interesting. I want to go ahead and introduce Brian Muir. Brian Muir is the founder of the James Madison Group, which is located in Salt Lake City, Utah, and he has been teaching and consulting with NACo for a few years now. We're very lucky to have him. He's a phenomenal speaker, and for those of you that, has anyone here seen Brian speak at any of our past conferences? Okay, all right, so then you know that you're in for a treat here. So without further ado, so we don't run over time, I'm going to turn this over to Brian, and we're going to get started. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate being back here. We're going to put this over here. Everybody hear me okay with this leveler mic on my tie so I can wander around if I need to? Just curious, in the audience here today, how many are you from rural counties that are more rural? Okay. Good. And how about more urban? Okay. How about suburban? Suburban. Okay. So great. We have an extra strong rural presence here today. So it's nice to have a great group. And we're going to try to make this interactive as much as we can today. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge until we get all the chairs in here, but we'll work with that. So thank you for your patience. Today's topic is navigating crucial confrontations and negotiating the win-win. We can see confrontations in our lives as both challenges and also opportunities. I want you to think of them more today as opportunities, and I think you'll get a lot more out of it thinking of that way. Now, depending on how much life experience you have already, by now you've probably already experienced the micromanaging boss or the difficult employee or maybe the elected official, that colleague that kind of conflicts with about everything you think. And at the heart of all of these experiences are great disappointment. And also, though, a lot of the things we're going to be talking today are applicable to our personal lives, so I hope you can find an opportunity to make that application as well. And we're going to talk about some strategies and tactics to help you to deal successfully with those. And the objective is to make your life more meaningful as you overcome conflict and confrontations. Now, those of you who handle conflict well at work and at home are probably a little bit more successful in your careers and happier as well. And some people, though, it doesn't matter what we do, it seems like it never seems to work. And so we're going to try to give you some fresh ideas. And hopefully, with the interaction that we have today, you're going to get some fresh ideas from the people that are sitting next to you as well. So in government, we tend to have a lot of different kinds of conflicts. You've probably seen all of these. I spoke to the county managers, not the county managers, but the state directors of counties this morning, and they brought up another category, which is elected official versus elected official. So many of you have that conflict as well. So I am just curious, how many in the audience here are elected officials? Okay. And then I would assume we've got some county appointed officials, county managers, etc. And is there another category I'm missing? Okay. Staff, yes, great. The rest of the staff. So we're going to try to give you some ideas. Working up the chain of command, it's working down the chain of command, as well as working with your colleagues when it comes to these crucial confrontations. What's interesting is in local government, there's this thing in public safety between the fire and the police. Some of you are very familiar with that. They have little jokes about each other that they tell, and they're not always kind jokes. But what's interesting is it takes sometimes an emergency to happen when all of a sudden they kick into high gear and get their job done right. I'm sure those of you who work with law enforcement know that. So why is it that sometimes, and feel free to throw out an answer here, why is it that sometimes it takes a crisis for people to resolve their conflicts? Common goal, right? A focus. They have a new focus. All of a sudden they find there's that win-win kicking in. That's why we call this the win-win. We've got to search for the win-win, which obviously that comes from Stephen Covey. But, also I think an improved relationship is a good goal. And thinking a new way instead of the old way, that's a good thing to consider. Now, here are some other conflicts. I talked about this last time I was here. Some of you might have been here for this. Here's some intergenerational conflicts that we get to deal with in the work environment these days. As you can see, the baby boomers are starting to retire, and we've got the Gen Xers. The baby boomers were known as the workaholic generation, by the way. And then we have the Gen Xers who were more of an independent generation, latchkey children who had to figure things out on their own a lot because both parents were working. And then we have the millennials, which they're still trying to find their way in the workforce, but they tend to think of work in a lot of different ways than the other generations. Now, one thing that the Gen Xers and the millennials, by the way, have in common is they both value significantly work-life balance. But that sometimes creates the conflict, because there's a perception of the boomer generation that the career is the thing, right, that we're trying to develop here, but work-life balance issues can also come to play. So perhaps I've mentioned a conflict now that you are able to connect with. Perhaps I haven't, but let's talk about an interesting study that was done of a lot of people. Found that 2.3% of the people here on the earth are here primarily to irritate you. Much higher. Well, that's interesting because I get that comment a lot. And what percent would you say are the people are here to irritate you? 2.4, a little higher for him. He must be very patient. And another statistic, anybody else? Really, I'd want to hear you. What do you think? 40, 12? I've actually done this survey of audiences before, and the most common number I get is 20% is the average of the people. And it's the old 80-20 rule. 20% of the people you get to deal with cause you 80% of your grief, right? So all you got to do is find a way to get rid of those people, and you've solved all of your problems. No, we can't do that. We've got to be professional, don't we? And ethical. So we've got to figure out a way. So I want you to take a minute here. Some of you have little handouts here, and the rest of you don't. But I want you to get out for those of you who don't have a little handout, I want you to get out a piece of paper and a pen, if you can, and write down, if you would, conflicts in 3 of these areas here. I want you to think about a conflict that you have with what we call your external customer, maybe a taxpayer that's a frequent flyer to your board meetings, maybe a fellow member of your a board member on a volunteer board, for example, and then also an internal customer, a colleague level, maybe an employee or a coworker that you work with a lot, that you have a conflict with. And then dig into your personal life a little bit, perhaps, and come up with a conflict of a family member or friend. And I want you to write down kind of the nature of the conflict and just briefly what's going on and how they act, their approach to the conflict. Now, if you would, just remember, one of these you're going to share with a partner here in a minute. So You want to be careful not to write that the conflict's about the person sitting next to you, okay? So just be anonymous here, and if there are persons in this room, don't write down that person, okay? And just write down what they're doing and kind of what's going on. So take a couple of minutes, those three areas. Now, these meters down here, after you've written about the conflicts, I want you to make a little note about how is this affecting your stress? Is it tolerable, uncomfortable, or intense? And then how is it affecting your productivity? Is it distracting, wasteful, or all-consuming? So even though you may not have a handout, hopefully that slide will help you kind of get a feel. So write down those. I'll just give you about 3 minutes, 1 minute per conflict to write down what's going on, your real situation you got to deal with right now, okay? And remember, you're going to share one of these with someone else here in a minute. So, can anybody not see the meters in the back with the writing? You okay? Can you see the meters? Let me just describe the meters again. You're going to write down to the degree between tolerable, uncomfortable, intense, where this person registers on your stress level. So, do they cause you tolerable stress, uncomfortable stress, or intense stress? And how are they affecting your productivity, if at all? Are they simply distracting you, wasting your time, or is it a constant, all-consuming thing that keeps you up at night? Okay? Yeah, for each situation, put on the meter to what level they're causing you stress or distraction, unproductivity. Take 1 more minute to finish that up. Make sure you've got at least one situation you can share with someone else. Okay, now it's time to have some fun and get some good advice from people who know how to give good advice, which is all y'all, right? So I want you to pick one of those areas and just have a conversation, a hopefully not so difficult conversation that hopefully doesn't turn into a confrontation, about your situation. Describe to them what this person is doing, what they're saying, and how it's affecting your stress and your productivity. And then take maybe a couple minutes each person. So I'll call time in a couple of minutes, and then you'll switch roles, okay? So at first, one will be the describer of your situation. The other person will listen very carefully and give some good advice. And then in 2 minutes, we'll switch roles so you can give the other point of view as well. So go ahead and take care of that. Maybe next to the person sitting next to you, reach across the aisle, whatever you want to do. Okay, everybody. Thank you. I hate to interrupt some good discussions here. Everyone, we're ready to move on. I'm glad you enjoyed that exercise. Okay. If you can hear me, clap. Okay, it's time to get going. Thank you very much. So, hopefully, with that little exercise, how many found it stress reducing? Was it stress reducing for anybody? Okay. For the rest of you, was it like post-traumatic stress? Was that what it was? Okay. So that's okay. We can heal that. Okay. We have some processes to. Okay. So I hope you found it a little bit cathartic, though, to express that. That is one way. And until you actually define what the conflict is all about, either verbally or writing it down, it's a hard thing. It's like squishy. You can't put your hand on it. So it's good to be able to do that. And I'm just curious, how many people have conflicts with nice, kind people? Any of yours? Everyone. They can be difficult, too, sometimes, can't they? In different ways. And so... yes, you haven't discovered it, yes. And that's where we're going to get to, right.
How many people have conflict with the Antichrist?
Well, we'll figure out how to deal with all kinds of conflict here. We'll just move on after that one. Okay. I'm just curious, how many people like to go hiking here? Have you ever been on a hike and then all of a sudden you got this rock in your shoe and you've got this dilemma, you want to keep up with everybody else? But you've got to figure out, am I going to be able to keep going here? This rock is bothering me. And you keep going, and you leave the rock in your shoe. And then what happens after a while? Blisters, sores, injury. And over time, what's the logical thing to do? Stop and get the rocks out of your shoe. Now, that seems logical, right? But when we experience emotional pain, it's a whole different ballgame, isn't it? We tend to leave those rocks in our shoes. And we just don't like to deal with the difficulty of having that confrontation. And so we put things off. And interestingly, a researcher at Purdue found that the working relationship with your boss actually is nearly equal in importance to the relationship you have when it comes to your spouse or significant other, when it comes to your overall well-being. And so those of you who are managers, right, of teams, just remember that. That is hard for them to handle. In fact, what usually ends up happening is employees, they tend, according to the research, to leave the manager and not necessarily the organization or the company. And this is a key insight because the productivity of your employees is also affected by the manager-employee relationship, which if we're trying to improve productivity, we've got to work on that. We've got to get these rocks out of shoes, and they go both ways. The employees can be the rock to other people, and the manager can be the rock in the shoe to another person, and our colleagues are same level people. And a lot of it has to do with the nature of that relationship, which we'll discuss here in a minute. Now, what's interesting, what's the ideal thing to do when someone's being difficult with you, or they're upset, or they're angry? Well, anybody? Listen. Listening is a really good technique to diffuse anger, supportive listening, active listening. Don't get involved too much. That's a really good strategy. Another thing that's really good is to role model the way you would like that other person to behave. It's not easy, but if all of a sudden they come up to you if they're angry and you instead are kind, they start thinking, that didn't work. Let's see what else I can try. Or maybe they're thinking, in their conscience, that's probably not a good way to handle this situation. And so hopefully we can role model the way we would like, the culture we'd like to create on our teams, on our county teams. Now, one of the interesting things about local government that makes it different than the private sector is the nature of the power that we have. We have power. We have power to regulate, to enforce, to say no to people when they want something. The power to tax. And by the way, how we say no is really important. For example, what do you think about this? Somebody says, that's the policy. I didn't write the rules. Is that a professional thing to say? So what's the best way to say it? Good. Very good. You turn it around. Make it and what you can say, and what most people want to know is, why was this policy created in the first place? You can say, the reason why we do things this way is actually to help you and to help your community and to do the what's best for your neighbors, and whether it's a code enforcement issue or whatever. But because of the nature of that power relationship, we have a lot more conflicts, I think, in local government. And the power goes the other way, too. The citizens have the power to not elect the elected officials, don't they? Or they have the power to approach the county manager and go around and say, hey, go to the commissioners and say, hey, I want you to do this. And so they can use that power as well. So we're dealing with that power constantly. Now, those of you who are managers, you also have power of your position, right? You have the ability to either hire someone or fire them in some cases if they're appointed, for example, or increase their salary or decrease their salary. And so that's an interesting challenge to the relationship from the outset. So it almost starts off on a bad note, doesn't it, in government, in local government, and the boss or the manager-employee relationship. And in a groundbreaking book, Crucial Confrontations, I'm just curious, how many have read Crucial Confrontations? Okay. There's another one called Crucial Conversations, which was built, the Crucial Confrontations came later. But they said that crucial confrontations lie at the root of all chronic family and organizational problems. And I like the word chronic because this is not just your average disagreement. This is a festering wound that seems to never heal over time. And so we've got to figure out how to resolve those. And here's what happens. And they say this really well in the book. Rather than speak directly and frankly about the problem at hand, they drop hints, change the subject, or withdraw from the interaction altogether. Fear drives people to various forms of silence, and their point of view is never heard except maybe in the form of gossip or rumor. Other people break away from their tortured inaction only to slip into violence. Frightened at the thought of not having been heard, they try to force their ideas on other people. So that's what the next tactic is. They cut people off, employ overstate statements, arguments, attack ideas, employ harsh debating techniques, and eventually result to insults and threats. Now, there's actually 4 patterns of interpersonal communication in conflict that come out of this little phrase, this little part of the book. And there's 3 of them are dysfunctional, okay? Some of you may have heard of these. You can see I'm going to put them up here on the board for you. We'll come back. Sorry about that. Almost there. I don't know what's going on there. We have a conflict here. We're going to go back. I'm going to try this. There we go. Thank you for your patience. Let me try one more thing here. Right-handed, not left-handed. Sorry about that. Okay. That should disappear in a second, I hope. There we go. That was all planned. Don't worry about it. Okay. So we have 4 different approaches. One of them is functional. 3 of them are dysfunctional. Can anybody tell me, hopefully, what's the functional way to deal with these situations? Assertiveness. Assertiveness is being honest, open, direct, courteous, professional, and the government word for it is diplomatic, right? That's the government word for it. So timidly is, some people call that passive behavior, right? Avoiding the situation altogether and just not wanting to deal with it. Some more introverted people tend to do that during conflict. And then we have the more dangerous, I think, of the 4, is the timid aggressive or the passive aggressive kind of things. So these are obviously not the kinds of things that we want to have in a productive work environment. And let's talk then about what we can do about this. And first of all, when we're in a supervisory situation, it is our job, right, to confront people who are misbehaving, or if we have manager responsibilities. And it's not the funnest thing of our jobs, but that's why you get the big bucks, right? Because you're able to do those difficult face-to-face. I like that it's face-to-face conversations with people. And that's what takes us to the next level, is to be honest, open, and sincere about it. Here's a little slide on what conflict actually is. In government, it's a clash of ideas, right? Political philosophies, as well as political strategies, and how we should get things done. It's a value conflict constantly in government. And so it's kind of the nature of what we do. And that's what conflict resolution is resolving those issues. Now, Let's talk about some real-world conflicts here. There's an ongoing, so I grew up in Idaho Falls, Idaho, where it's really cold. We had what we call the battle of the thermostat between my mother and my father. Every year, it'd get 20 below zero, and so my dad liked to save money on the heat bill because we had a big family, and he actually liked to keep, believe it or not, he'd like to keep the thermostat at 60 degrees, and he liked to wear a jacket. We just need to put on a jacket and move around, and you'll be fine. Can you imagine the conflict that is brewing here? Okay, and my mom liked to have it a little warmer. It's 70 degrees. And I have conflicts within classrooms all the time between temperature, by the way. That's pretty common. But that's a small conflict, though relatively small. Now, my dad wasn't one to give me a lot of advice, though, in life. But one time, I was getting married, of course, and so he wanted to give me some really good advice. So he said, never go to bed angry. Okay, and I said, that was great advice. And then I also read recently, though, that Phyllis Diller said, never go to bed mad, stay up and fight. You know, what's interesting about these rules that we have in society is there are exceptions to the rule. There's time when it should be. Let's time to just let this thing simmer down a little bit. Come, let's take this offline. And I'm sure you've had those kinds of discussions with employees. And so you've got to know when to let it ride, keep going, or when to let it slide. Let's talk now, though, and with this group here, we have a lot of people who have had a lot of experience with conflicts. There's some costs and some benefits to conflict. Let's talk, first of all, what are the costs? What does it cost us when we have a conflict? Some of the staff time, productivity, anxiety. There's something that comes with conflict, especially for the person who doesn't have a power in the conflict, right? All right. Okay. Misconceptions. Okay. Trust is broken down. Morale, motivation issues. Really a big challenge, right? Sleep. Yeah, that life-work-family balance issue can be affected by conflict, right? Taking the work home with them. So a lot of people who are at work are always thinking about home conflicts, perhaps. People at home are thinking about work conflicts. And so we've got to have all those areas we talked about earlier, those relationship areas working together for us. So what do we do? How do we deal with conflict? Well, what are some benefits? Let's think about outside the box here. What are some benefits of conflict to motivate us to keep going? A different way of thinking. Okay? Okay. Better ideas. Okay. Okay. Just having the conflict gets the thorn out, and so that issue is on the table now. There's no uncertainty. Now we know exactly what we're disagreeing about. And that's a big step. Right. So, you know, an interesting term, thank you for the feedback, everybody, was coined by William White back in 1952 in Fortune magazine. He said, groupthink is a rationalized conformity, an open, articulate philosophy that group values are not only expedient, but good and right as well. Now, Irving Janis expanded on this. He said, groupthink is a mode of thinking that people engage in when they are deeply involved in a cohesive in-group. And this is particularly applicable to the political realm. When the members' strivings for unanimity override their motivation to realistically appraise alternative courses of action. Now, I like to think of this as teamwork to an extreme position, which becomes a fault, a dysfunction. It's taking teamwork to an extreme position. I have this little seesaw here graph. As you can see, in a manager's role, we've got to balance things on our team, in our community, in our organization. We want to keep everybody unified and loyal and build that strong thing, that camaraderie, that teamwork we want. But also, we want to have a healthy team that allows for conflict in a safe environment, allows people to be honest, open, direct. You know, there's got to be boundaries around it, of course. But that makes the team more functional, because then a lot of those conflicts can prevent us, if we listen to other people's opinions, from making stupid decisions, right? If we've got somebody that has some good information, we want to listen to that information. A perfect example of groupthink was, those of you who might know about the Challenger disaster. There were some engineers at Morton Thiokol who had told NASA, basically, we don't think you should launch during those cold temperatures the Challenger space shuttle, because we haven't tested the O-rings in those temperatures. And sure enough, they pressured them into just going ahead and going with it, and just didn't listen completely. And unfortunately, one of the greatest disasters in space shuttle history occurred. What's that? Budgets. Tell me more. Yes. Yes. Thanks for applying it to a real situation. Yeah. Right. 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 Yeah.
You show the firefighters and police officers, and they'll tell me constantly, firefighters make more than I do, or police officers get this and we don't.
Right. Right. So so we've got to be able to work through those, and I have a process to share with you at the very end here, by the way, on how to negotiate those kinds of situations. So thank you for that comment, to make it more real for your situation. Yes, go ahead, please.
Is that one would have to be extremely careful with this to not squash creativity.
Yes. Yes, it's balancing individual needs and expression with the group's needs. And we got to be team players, but we also got to be honest. And, you know, the degree to which a person is honest sometimes is how they need to balance their own career needs, right? An employee who wants to be honest with their manager sometimes may not dare to be honest with their manager because they're afraid, right? So they have to go through this idea of balancing the risk of saying something versus the reward of doing it. And hopefully they'll develop a relationship with that manager over time, and you'll do the same thing with your people. You'll create an environment where you're encouraging people to share what's on their mind so you can have a healthier team. All right. So how do we deal with some of these difficult situations with our own emotions when we're dealing with an angry person right there in front of us, right in our face? Well, this is probably one of the best quotes from the book, is we need to replace our own anger, or I would substitute whatever emotion you're feeling, our own fear, our own disappointment, whatever emotion you tend to get during a conflict, with curiosity. You know, so basically, you're all of a sudden changing from getting defensive, to, I wonder what's going on here. You're starting to think strategically. How are we going to solve this problem? Instead of getting drawn into the emotions of the situation. And it's really key. If you're early in the game, here's another little quote here from the book. Let me just, before I dive into this quote. I grew up in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and potatoes are everything. Anybody from Idaho here today? Okay, great. That's great. That's where I grew up. And so we had this game called Hold the Hot Potato. Basically, it was like musical chairs, but you played the music and then you threw this potato around, and whoever ended up with the potato at the end was the one who lost, and then they were eliminated. until you get down to the one person. Now, I think these difficult confrontations and conversations, these difficult people that we deal with are a lot like these hot potatoes. Everybody wants to throw the potato to somebody else. Could you please deal with this person? Okay? But unfortunately, when you're in for you, you're the last person a lot of the time, right? To go-to person. And so you've got to figure out a way to deal with them. But you also got to figure out how to deal with this person without getting burned yourself emotionally. And that's why we have that little pad there to protect our hands from getting burned from that potato. But here's the metaphor continuing. And here's some ways that we can deal with this. Don't TIP. It's easy to say. Does anybody know what that means? It doesn't have anything to do with your restaurant waiter. It means don't take it personally. Well, that's easy to say, right? A little hard to do. But anybody here like football? Okay, this gentleman here. What is your favorite football team? Alabama. Crimson Tide? Is that college football? Okay. All right. And so I think, if I'm not mistaken, are you pretty confident that I couldn't sway you to become an Auburn fan? Okay. What if I told you, what if I just came up to you and are you confident enough that if I just said, you're just an Alabama fan, and I think you should be an Auburn fan, would that persuade you if I pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed? Okay, so you're pretty confident in yourself about your loyalty. Now, if on the other hand, let's imagine that somebody comes up to you and tells you you're a dirty, rotten scoundrel, right? And you know you're a really good person, and you have got good values, and they're sitting there, telling you this, but just imagine that they're telling you that you're an Auburn fan, and you know you're an Alabama fan. Hopefully that will help you. That's a little simple, fun thing to do. But you got to have a sense of humor when you're dealing with people, right? You can't learn to let those people get under your skin. So the next thing that we got to do, though, to protect ourselves, we got to really care. This is an interesting thing to do. Sincerely care about the other person. People can sense when you care. And when you care about them, all of a sudden, many of them soften, right? And they're less likely to attack you. Now, there was a French diplomat once that said, the secret to success is sincerity. And once you can fake that, you've got it made. Well, fake it till you make it with some people, right? But really, eventually, some people can really tell if we're sincere or not, can't they? And so we got to be careful of those people especially. The next thing to protect yourself is, again, when you replace your own negative emotion with curiosity, you're actually keeping yourself from hurting yourself emotionally with this situation or letting that person hurt you. You're becoming like Dr. Phil. Why is this person acting this way, right? That's what you're doing, or Dr. Laura, whoever you want. And the next thing you do to protect yourself is, why is this person feeling threatened? Is it their security? Their security has to do with what's the right and the wrong thing to do, their ethic code, for example. Or maybe it's their money, right? Or their power. Maybe it's their power, their influence over other people, or their schedules. The decision that your commission has just made all of a sudden takes away their ability to make a living. Doesn't that make you feel a little bit empathetic towards them? Changes, and that protects you from getting drawn into the emotions. Okay. All right, the next thing is realize you don't have to make everything all better. So it's a really good book, actually. It's called You Don't Have to Make Everything All Better. Joy Lund and Gary Lund, who were marriage therapists, actually wrote the book. But what they found is a lot of people feel like they have to solve all the world's problems. And if they can't, it keeps them up at night. And so if you're one of those people, if that's your personality, if you feel like you're trying to do everything you can, and all of a sudden, boy, it just turns you into somebody that can't function, that's not a good thing to be. And you do need to allow people that you supervise and you manage to feel the consequences of their poor decisions. And they, sometimes we share ownership with the person that we're managing, and sometimes it's really their issue and it's their problem. And we can't get drawn into their personal issues. We got to be careful to balance that. So hopefully one of these 5 things fits your situation to protect yourself from getting burned by conflicts. Now to the quote. Our behavior with crucial confrontations with people, it's important how we act right at the very beginning, because very quickly things can go south on us, right? And there's an old proverb that says, a soft answer turns away anger. And I think it's very true. And again, we're going back to that issue we talked about earlier at the beginning, role modeling the way you would like them to behave. And that will be getting you to a good spot. Now, it also has to do with our own philosophy, how we deal with these crucial confrontations, the way we think about the other person. We tend to create these stories in our minds. We are the hero. We can do nothing wrong, and the other person is the villain. Here's what they say. We've got to get away from that thinking. I'll come back to that. You can't solve a problem with a villain. You can only do that with a human being. Before you start a crucial confrontation, begin to see the humanity of the other person and avoid telling the ugly stories about them. Exaggerating, for example, their faults, so that it makes you look better and them not look so good, right? Instead, what they suggest that we do is tell, like Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story, right? A more complete story. Get all the facts. And you're probably not going to get all the facts about somebody until you get to know them really well. And you're probably not going to get to know them really well until you break the ice, until you overcome those original conflicts. But have you ever had a situation where at first you just didn't get along with this person, but when you got to know them better, all of a sudden, they became a really good friend? Does that happen to anybody here? That can happen with the people, assuming we tend to follow a procedure that we're talking about here today. And here's the question we ask. Instead of asking, what's the matter with that person, we ask, why would a reasonable, decent, rational human being do this? The benefit is that it protects us emotionally, but the other benefit is we start thinking, okay, maybe this person's feeling threatened by their security, right? Their inner sense of what's right and what's wrong. Maybe it's their political belief is so ingrained in them that I've just definitely violated their political belief. And so now how can I come to understand and appreciate their value system, at least on a cognitive level? All right, so that's another thing. Another thing, going back to this slide here, oftentimes it's all about timing when we're dealing with people. So many times we think we have all of the answers. It's only logical what needs to be done. It's rational. You need to do this. It's like an equation. If you do this, then do this, this will be the result. Anybody have teenagers here? Okay. Does that work? For some teenagers it does. For most, I've found it doesn't. And Stephen Covey brought this idea up of I don't know if you've heard of the emotional bank account. So you've got to make deposits in your teenagers or your family members or your employees' emotional bank accounts. And then you keep making those deposits, and then when it's time for a withdrawal, you'll be able to do that. And you'll be able to solve the problem with them. But if you've got an emotional conflict with someone that needs to be, resolved, it doesn't matter how much time you spend. You're just going to go around in circles trying to solve the problem and get into that harsh debating tactics kind of situation. So I'm going to share with you. I'm going to do a really quick thing here. We have time. I want to do a difficult conversation exercise here. All right? I want you to pair up with someone here. And this is going to be a little different than you probably expected. But I want you to tell the other person, and let's imagine that you're the manager, and it's been reported to you that your employee has body odor. Okay? So, what you've got to do is you've got to diplomatically tell them about this issue. So, I'm going to give each of you a minute to tell the other person using your strategies of interpersonal communications that they have body odor. And then I'll call a minute, and you'll switch roles again. Okay, go for it. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say it smells a lot better in here now. Thank you very much. Okay. I got on my cologne while we were talking. Okay. He was hinting. That was a little timid, wasn't it? How many people here felt comfortable being assertive with that situation? Okay. How many felt really embarrassed and uncomfortable at first? Okay. Even though you knew they didn't have... I would imagine a lot of you have much more difficult things to talk about than body odor with your employees. So it has to do with their performance. That's tough. Yes, please, in the back. Okay. That's tough, isn't it? And then the challenge, of course, is then if they're in a close working environment with some other people, it becomes a difficult distraction. So maybe you can make some kind of an accommodation, I would guess, for those kind of situations.
The other thing is that I personally have never sneezed, gotten a rash, or wheezed from body odor, but I certainly have my stuff used to cover it up.
Okay. Well, those are difficult conversations we all get to have, don't we? When we go back to work and face the real world. So I want to touch base on one thing on this issue of the emotional bank account. A lot of the times we think if we tell an employee that we appreciate them once a year at the annual performance review, that all of a sudden we have this great bond with this person, don't we? But that doesn't really work that way, does it? And if we also give people corrective feedback once a year at the annual performance evaluation, what happens? Surprise, 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 right? And that's not a good, healthy situation either. So here's a little acronym for you. The first letter is F. When we're giving people feedback and making those deposits in their emotional bank account, make sure the F it's going to be frequent. It needs to be often. And this goes well for corrective feedback as well. This is from Bruce Tolgan, by the way, who came up with this acronym. So F is frequent. Then the A, we're spelling the word fast here. The A is accurate. We need to make sure that the information that we are giving them feedback about is data-based accuracy, facts, figures, not opinions. And then we need to get specific. That's the S. Specific about what it is that we like that they're doing to get them to keep doing that, and then specific about what it is we don't like that they're doing so that they can have clarity, if you will. And the last thing is this needs to be, as I mentioned, not once a year, it's got to be timely, right? The T is timely. So frequent, accurate, specific, and timely. That will help us go a long ways into building that emotional bond that can be there with our employees and our coworkers. Now, as we wrap up here our discussion today, I want to talk a little bit about the issue of trust. And there's two sources of power that we tend to have as managers and as leaders in our communities. We have the power of position, right? And then we have our personal or persuasive power. You know, if we can, we should try to use our position power only as needed. Because if we overuse that, eventually the other person can feel intimidated, right? Instead, a better way is to use our powers of persuasion, of sincerely caring about the other person to help them in a good way. That builds a stronger bond that's much more sustainable over time. Now, this works with teenagers as well and children, of course, but sometimes you got to be careful. Don't get too naive because, as Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify, right? I'm going to trust you to come home at 11 o'clock this weekend, but I'm going to verify it by installing surveillance cameras when you come here. Okay. Well, we actually just use security system, which, anyway, that works too. So, but anyway, you've got to build that trust with that person the reason I'm bringing this up is in order to negotiate from a position of strength, to make withdrawals from that emotional bank account or whatever it is you want to call it, that there's something there that you can work with. And, there's an interesting negotiator named George Karras. Some of you might have heard of him before. He's one of the best negotiators in the world. And he actually did a negotiation seminar once. And a gentleman from Japan came up to him afterwards and said, this is just some insight about our culture here, and you may or may not agree with it, but I think there's an interesting thing here that we can apply. He said, in America, you treat negotiations as like hunting. You go in, you kill, and you're out of there, right? You go in for the kill and you get her done. Well, in Japan, we treat negotiations more like farming, where we plant a seed, we nurture it, we fertilize it, we put water on it, we pay attention, give it enough sunlight, and then what we can do is we can harvest from that over and over again. So that harvesting of the negotiations with a good, strong relationship. And I did a lot of work with, when I was in international sales with a previous position, where in the Asian culture, the relationship is extremely important. And we go in there and all of a sudden, we just want to get, the deal done. But it's, we need to be patient with people and work with them. I think there's something we can learn from all of us from that particular metaphor. So, now, trust is an important issue, of course. Here's a 7-step process. Most of you should probably have a handout by now, I would guess. We're getting some more. Okay. And if you have any, that's okay. If you have any problems, email me. I can get you the PowerPoint. And the handout as well. My email's on the front, or you can check with me afterwards. I'd be glad to send that to you. So here is our step for resolving. It's a more step-by-step process. Remember, we're resolving chronic issues, not just your day-to-day things. So this is a little bit more involved here. First of all, the R is you need to recognize your role in this conflict and the real issue. And you need to also recognize your negotiating position. Are you negotiating from a position of strength or weakness? Let me give you an example. If you're negotiating with your manager, are you in a position of strength? Position-wise, you're probably not. Hopefully, personal power, they've got your trust because, obviously you can get a lot more out of that personal power there, I think, to negotiate a raise, for example. Okay? So if you've got some good... Now, other times you're negotiating from a position of strength, of course, and you could use your position power to win the negotiation in the short term, but lose it in the long term, couldn't you? And so sometimes you're negotiating with people at the same level with you. It's different, isn't it? How you approach that negotiation is really different. Now, interestingly enough, sometimes we think it's the other person. Remember going back to that, those stories we tend to tell ourselves. Here's this interesting comment from Russian philosopher Tolstoy. Everybody thinks about changing the world, but nobody thinks about changing themselves. And that's where really real change can happen for a lot of us. I don't care what position we hold or what kind of relationship we have with somebody. We can always find a way to improve ourselves, I've found over the years. And that oftentimes comes from being open to other people's feedback, constructive feedback on what we can do to improve. Then we need, at this point, we need to make sure that we have what I call a working trust. You don't have to completely trust this person in all situations, life or death or whatever, but you do have to have a working trust with this person. And then you can get to the next step. You engage the person in an open discussion, honestly, get everything out, get the rock out of the shoe, and discuss. This is what's bothering me, or this is where I think we need to come together. And we need to make sure that the other person actually feels safe in the conversation. That's one of the Crucial Confrontations book's biggest points. Make sure you are making this person feel safe. And I like the medieval literature, Knights of the Round Table metaphor here. We know who's in charge, King Arthur, but the Knights of the Round Table, they're all sitting together and they're all equally heard for a while. Everybody gets a chance to speak their mind, and then once everybody's united, they move ahead and King Arthur makes the decision. That's an ideal way, but it's a very safe environment to have a discussion in. Sympathize with the other person's point of view. See, maybe their life view is different than yours because of the culture they were raised in or their experiences in life. They have a lot of experiences that you could learn from. And so then, next thing you want to do is you need to open your mind to their possible solutions to the issue. Now, ideally, you want to go into this and looking for a solution that the other person wants. Why would you do that? Why would you want a solution from the other person instead of your solution? Buy-in. I like to call it ownership. They're going to own it, right? This was your idea, right? Have you ever heard it said that anybody? This was your idea. Okay. It definitely puts you in a position. And obviously, if you agree with it anyway, you get to look like the hero, right? All of a sudden. And, and it's a nice thing to do too at the same time. But it's strategic as well. So open your mind to their possible solutions and list and analyze mutually reasonable solutions together. And obviously, in the real world, oftentimes, they will come up with something that you don't completely agree with. And that's when you got to start thinking about, okay, how can we compromise? Now, so you do need to consider compromise, but I would caution you, why compromise when you can create? Why compromise if you can create? And you can create, and we talked, I don't know who brought it up earlier, fresh ideas come from getting outside of the groupthink box, right? Conflict is a good thing to hear other people's point of view of what's important and how to do it. And so listen to other people's ideas and start creating. Stephen Covey, towards the end of his life, wrote a book called The Third Alternative, which was basically, he was elaborating a little bit more on the win-win. And he basically said, the third alternative is something that nobody's thought of yet. And conflict can bring that kind of innovation in a relationship or in a process, that we can do that if we've created a culture that's safe for that to happen. Now, the next thing is we've got to be optimistic about where this relationship is going with this person, okay? And we're going to visualize things being successful. Now we've done all this work negotiating this win-win solution. We're going to be optimistic. We're not going to be cynical, right? I think I don't know if I got this right. Cynics don't create, critics don't contribute, right? And it's an interesting thought. If we can get away from our past history with this person, reset everything, and let's move ahead. it works obviously not just in business relationships and government relationships, but in personal relationships as well. And lastly, establish and agree upon a plan and a schedule of how you're going to accomplish things. Make sure you're holding the other person accountable to what they agreed to do, what they promised to do, and that you're holding yourself accountable. And I think you'll go far. I've got 1 more minute here for questions. Go ahead, sir.
What are you doing wasting your time here? Why aren't you in D.C.?
I was in D.C. last year talking about how to deal with mice. Thank you. We need to do this, obviously, in communities and in the country, too. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Any other questions? Okay. We have a drawing announcement, right, if I'm not mistaken? Okay. Did you want to go ahead and take over here? Okay. Okay.
Okay. Thank you all for being here today. First of all, did everybody get a ticket? No? Okay.
All right. Who didn't get a ticket? Raise your hand. Okay, right behind you, honey. Okay. That's my wife, by the way. That's why I called her honey. Okay. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't creating a problem. Michelle, right behind you. Very good. Okay. Okay.
Franklin, stalling just a little so we have your handouts. We're working on those. So the book is Crucial Confrontations, and the foreword's by Tom Peters, Tools for Resolving Broken Promises, Violated Expectations, and Bad Behavior. And the authors are of the national bestseller Crucial Conversations, don't say that 10 times fast, Carrie Patterson, Jofis Grenny, Ron McMillan, and Al Switzler. So, does everybody have a ticket now? Yes?
Okay. Oh, you want me to get in trouble? Okay, I'm creating a conflict here because I'm playing favorites, right? Here, I'll just make sure I'm objective and don't look. Okay, here we go. It's, maybe you ought to read that. I don't have my glasses on.
Okay. 846207.
Give her a hand. That's great.